Hey everyone. My goodness, I'm having such a lovely lunch that I thought I would share it with you and wish everyone a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Today is the day that, not today, Tuesday was the day that my conversation with Dr. Lana was released. And this coming Tuesday, the part 2, the second part of my conversation with Dr. Lana, is going to be released. So it's top of mind right now, and I'm thinking about it. I decided that we're going to wait until the new year before we post my conversation with Andrea. I think I want to wait until the new year just because I think, first of all, that what Dr. Lana and I covered, that's a lot to absorb, and I would really like people to have a chance to sit with it. And second of all, I think that during the holidays, during the Christmas, New Year season, a lot of us don't really have our listening ears on. We don't really have the emotional energy to maybe process new things like, our spiritual practices and whether we have inadvertently or, out of a sense of entitlement, appropriated some spiritual rituals that maybe we need to think twice. It's the holidays aren't really the ideal time for people to take a hard look at themselves. And I know that I like to just completely unplug during Christmas and New Year. So we're going to save the conversation with Andrea for the new year. And I thought that while I was wishing you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year, I thought I would share with you the scene in front of me. As many of you know, I do work part-time at the local hospital here, and I often like to take lunch in my car. So that's where I am right now. I've finished my lunch, and the reason why I like to eat in the car is because I can take my car to this little spot that's right by the ocean, and I like to have lunch with my animals. Or they're not my animals, they're like my animal friends, because I see the same animals. I've been visiting the same animals several times a week now for months, and I've gotten to the point where I'm starting to get to know them. So we've got I'm right on the ocean front here. So depending on what the tide is doing, sometimes the tide is very low, and then I will see clams or gooey ducks just spray water up. So it's like you're watching kind of a rocky, muddy beach that's full of barnacles and seaweed that's flattened out. And then you just see these like random spurts of water, just these little fountains of water that go up maybe 1 or 2 feet in the air and then they fall. So it's always funny to hang out with the clams. And it's always the same clams that are doing it. The water's always coming up from the same spots because we have the clams that have settled into their favorite spot. So it's neat to come and see these individual clams and watch their behavior. But up from invertebrates, it gets to be very, very interesting. Not every day do I see bald eagles. There are bald eagles that used to have a nest at an island nearby here. But their nest blew over in a big storm years ago, and because they are retired, they're like a retired breeding pair. They've been around here for over 20 years. They just never rebuilt their nest, even though the nest had been blown over. And they rebuilt it before while they were still breeding. They're not breeding anymore. They don't care about their nest anymore, so they didn't bother to rebuild it. But I do sometimes see them cruising along as I take up a spot here. So I do like to say hello to my eagle friends. You can tell the ones that are older, the pair that is really old, because they're so conservative with their movements and how they navigate the space. It's the older pair that tend to have more of a neutral wing posture when they're in the air. They like to just float on the wind. Like we have constant air movement here. So I like to watch them, and they will just use the movement of the air to navigate them to where they want to go. So they'll angle their wings against the wind, whichever direction it's going in, allow the wind to carry them in a direction that is perhaps away from where they want to go, but they'll angle their wings so that they can gain sufficient height. And then they'll angle their tail so that they can bank in a more general direction of where they're going. And I can watch them take 20 minutes to bank up and then around. And after maybe 20 minutes or so, then they're able to angle down and they swoop down and they'll get to the spot that they were aiming for in the first place. Young animals, young eagles, especially the juveniles that still have their brown and gold feathers, they don't have white heads yet. Juveniles are going to flap mightily against that wind, and they would end up at their destination probably in under a minute, whereas the older ones might take 20 minutes. However, the older ones probably burned no calories getting there. They put out almost no effort, and I think because they've been around so long and they're so used to the air currents, I think that it becomes a little bit of a game for them, a bit of a challenge for their intelligence to figure out, how can I get over there and expend as little energy as possible? And honestly, I think a part of it, they must be feeling some arthritis. They've been around for so long. I think a part of it is just aging. It takes more effort. Like, it feels like more of an effort. It costs them more to fight the wind. So it's really interesting to see how they navigate the air currents around here, and that's how I know that that's one of the old ones. When I see them artfully mastering the air currents, it's so fascinating because there's probably 100 different eagles around here. There's a pair that lives down on an island that's further up the inlet, and I can see them from a different spot by the ocean, but it's a little further away from the hospital, so I don't tend to drive there for lunch. But those eagles are fairly young, and they will full on engage in fights with the crows, and they will kill the seagulls for fun. So they're still quite young and full of themselves. And I suspect that young pair, I don't know where their nest is, but I wonder if they might expand their territory when these elderly eagles, these masters of air currents, eventually one of them is going to, and both of them will eventually pass away. And I wonder who gets their territory, because eagles tend to, it's kind of like getting promoted from within, they don't tend to battle for territory, unless there's a vacuum and there's a lot of young eagles around without having the old senior ones around. But it seems to me, and when I ask the eagles, they give me visuals of, or not visuals, eagles are always so visual. So when I say they give me visuals, it's like I'm seeing their territory from their point of view, but it's extremely high up in the sky. And they get a feeling of, oh, I'm not in my territory. There's a feeling of discomfort when they're not in their territory. And when an eagle or eagles have passed on or disappeared, there's a feeling of uneasiness but vacantness to their territory, and over time the neighboring eagles will push into that territory and see if they can perhaps upgrade it, upgrade their territory. They may move over, and that gives the younger eagles an opportunity to horn in on perhaps some higher territory. Now, sometimes younger eagles will try to push older established eagles out of their territory. Young eagles can be very rude. So every situation is different. What I'm saying is not by any means the way it always goes, but this just seems to be the perspective that the eagles out here seem to share with me. So one of the reasons I come down here is I hope that I can see these wonderful old souls that are out here. Another one of my very favorite characters out here. I'll get back to birds, but right now I'm going to go to mammals. There is a harbour seal who I call Charlie, and I don't know if Charlie is male or female, but Charlie would work for both. And Charlie is an adorable harbour seal. Why are seals so cute? It's, they've got these giant eyes. I think that's part of it. But today it's high tide, so I don't see any clams. I actually don't see any rocks whatsoever. The tide is very high, and so it's covering everything over. So it's kind of like I'm parking right up on the water. I'm elevated a bit. But since the water is covering, whenever the water is this high, Charlie the harbour seal comes by and spends some time diving around in those rocks. And, I should look up and see what Charlie is eating. Some of it is absolutely fish, but I don't know, I have a suspicion there's something else that Charlie's eating off the rocks. Maybe, I don't know if it's crab or what it is, but Charlie will go down underwater for maybe 5, sometimes 10 minutes. Seems like a very long time. And then we'll resurface and we'll do a bunch of pff, 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 almost like Charlie got a bunch of water up their nose and is trying to, snort it out. Probably a lot of it is just getting the oxygen exchange completely through their body, making sure that they can hold their breath again for a nice long time. It's actually been about 10 minutes since I've seen Charlie, so I'm wondering if they are going to surface here again, or perhaps they have moved further up the inlet a little bit. But if I sit here for my break, I'll take about half an hour or 45 minutes for lunch, depending on whether I've had a break in the morning. And so I just like to sit here to see if I can see Charlie. And whenever the tide is high, almost always I get to see Charlie because they're on this little routine cruising around here on this lunch buffet. So that's part of the reason why I like to sit here and feel like I'm having lunch with my animals, because Charlie will always come and eat. So anyway, that's really adorable. If I'm lucky, I might see a sea lion, a California sea lion. I might see that maybe once a month. But they're just cruising by, going about their business. They're not on a feeding schedule the way that Charlie is. So another crew that I see almost every time I come down here, really regardless of what the tide is doing, there is a little gang of mergansers, which is really cute. Go and Google merganser. I am not totally sure of the species, but they, if you Google like Northwest Pacific merganser, you can find a photo of a bird that has a very a flat face, a vertically flat face, that with a comb, an orange, rusty orange head with spiked kind of mohawk feathers. So they kind of look like ducks that are very, I don't know, punk rock ducks, I'm gonna say. So they're about duck size, about mallard size, and they paddle along in these lovely little groups, and they are ocean divers. So, they'll paddle along, there'll be about 6 of them, and then they'll do this little hop out of the water and then dive straight down. And that's always fun to see. So because I've got these rocks right in front of me, especially when the tide is high, they like to go fishing around those rocks. So I'm not sure what sort of sea life is under those rocks when I'm not there, but the mergansers are into it. So they will come and they'll spend 10, 15 minutes fishing there. And another species, there's a species that I need to look up. I don't know exactly what they are, but they're duck-shaped and duck-sized, but they have white sides. And they're bigger than buffleheads. And they don't have white on their heads so much. There might be some white coming up their necks, but they look almost like they're more loon-sized, really. But they are just white on the sides. So I'd have to look that up. I'm not sure of that species, but they have a duck kind of a shape, and they also dive. But they're just beautiful and striking, those animals. And then I do see buffleheads every once in a while. So buffleheads look like kind of shrunken down mergansers. They are kind of half the size, and they've got these white, bright white cheeks that takes up most of the sides of their heads, and they're just the cutest little seabirds. And then finally, I'm looking at one right now. These are some of my favorite seabirds are the cormorants that are out here, and they're not everybody's favorite seabird. They kind of remind me of vultures, and I think that's why I like them, because they're big, and they have these funny personalities. They like to, whenever it's sunny out, they like to sit on rocks and just spread their wings out and just absorb the sunshine. But they don't really mind it when it's, gray, cold weather like this. They go fishing just the same. But they do like to really take advantage of the sun. But, they seem to be very hardy, and no matter what the weather is doing, they are able to cope with it, and they'll still fish and socialize and not really let it get them down. So cormorants are black birds. They look kind of like skinny geese. They're very large compared to a lot of the other seabirds that are around. And they've got these long necks, and they have these bills, or these beaks rather. They're not bills that are flat like ducks or geese. It's longer, and it has a hook on the end of it. So it's, they've got these beaks that they're really meant for catching fish. And the wonderful thing about these birds is they fly the best underwater. Just the way they dive down underwater, they just look so joyful to be able to return to the underwater where they're just truly in their element. And when I talk to the cormorants, they're so chatty, and they love giving me the feeling of swimming around underwater and how they can zip around, and they're much more mobile underwater than your average seabird. Like they can zip around I think they can zip around better than penguins. They're very maneuverable underwater because they use their wings, and their neck kind of turns into this snake or eel, and they're able to zip through the water very quickly. They're so well built for hunting underwater. It's really incredible. They're very well adapted. So anyway, these are some of the animals that I like to share my lunchtime with, and I'd better get heading back to the hospital now. But I just thought I would share that little bit from my life. I thought I would share with you the animals who I share my lunch with many times. So I hope that put a smile on your face. If any of you has any questions for some of the West Coast animals, please feel free to send me an email to finopsychic@gmail.com, and I will post answers, whether I address it in a future podcast or maybe I'll post it on my blog, psychicandtraining.com. So feel free to ask me questions of the animals, because oftentimes when I'm watching them, I just like to be observant, and I like to kind of tap into their experience, but I don't always think of questions to ask, So I like to hear your questions, and it helps me to learn about the animals too. Anyway, I hope that you all are going to have a wonderful holiday season. I'm going to send you so much love from myself and from my family, and we will talk to you all in the new year.